I've been asked to make a hall table cover. The table is 18 inches wide by 55.5 by 32 high. The panels, I've got a split in the middle so that she can pick either side up to get into the shelves behind it. Then 2 end panels and the back. Now the back I'm doing in one long piece and then just folding around either end so it looks like it's doing what it's doing on the front. These panels I've added an extra 9 inches to because they fold underneath. And then I've got 5 panels that go 4 on each corner and 1 down the center. The lining is cut basically the same size and everything is cut in straight lines. This is one of the widths that I want to make into a panel. Pop that on top. Match the outside edges together because I'm actually going to sew these to the exact size of each other rather than altering them. It's easier. And then I'm going to make a little nick here at the end and cut up, and that is going to be the width of the panel. Now this is the piece that I've got left, and then this piece I'm literally going to fold over and cut up. These are going to be either the corner panels to hide the corners, or it's going to go into where the center is. I'll mark the center like that, and I'll do the same as before and just cut it up. When you're sewing the parts together, always make sure the right sides are together, and often lining fabrics, it doesn't really matter. But this is a sateen, so the right side is very smooth, and the back side you can see the weave. The stitch length needs to be around about 3.5, and with a little forward and back I'm going to just sew all the way to the end. Make sure it's even all the way down. So this is 3/4 of an inch. When I get to the bottom I'm just going to do forward and back as well. This is for the back side of the skirt against the wall, so it doesn't have a panel in it. Now for the back panel of this skirt, there are no right sides or wrong sides, so I'm just going to put the 2 selvages, one of each piece, together. I have put the right sides of the same piece together before, so just be careful. Easily done, especially if you're rushing. And here again I'm going to put a large seam on it. I'm just going to run the side of my foot along the selvage mark there all the way to the bottom. With the centre back, open the seam and just press it into place so it's open. I want it as flat as possible. I'm not going to worry about pressing all of it. That'll be right at the end, and I might suggest she steams it. This is a linen fabric, so it creases quite quickly. What I want to do is work out how wide the fabric needs to be. I don't like having a seam right in the centre, so I'm going to offset it by 3 inches. That should be about 3 inches. Flatten that out like that. Measure across the bottom. It doesn't have to be absolutely exact, it's just a place to start. 27 inches is the panel width, so I've got 2 at 27. Then I'm going to add on 8 inches for the back, which is there, and then I'm going to add on another 5 inches for the side flaps. That is how much fabric I'll be cutting off. It will all come crystal clear when it's put together. Trim back on both sides. Make sure you only do one side at a time because it was uneven. I'm now going to do the same with the back. Steam the back open like this. Fold that in half. Fold this in half as well. By doing this, I actually get them more accurate. I'm going to take the inside back panel, which is just one complete piece, fold it along the center where the seam is, and lay that flat. Take the exterior panel, which is also one large piece, and fold that in half. All I'm going to do is open it up, and in the center of this pleat here on the fold, I'm going to put a pin, and then I'm going to pin one side. Here's the second pin. Hold both so all of it runs together. Put a third pin in, take the 2 folded pieces, pull it out again, and then put your next pin in. Take the end and then pull it so that it all lines up with the 2 outside edges of the front fabric, and the 2 outside edges of the lining don't match up. You see there's a big chunk that's different. Just snip in here. Pull the front fabric off. From my little snag that I took there to here is 13.25 inches. So all I'm going to do is keep both sides together and cut in a straight line all the way across. Both pieces of fabric should be the right size. Put the last pin on this side. Now this one I am going to pin because it's rather large and I don't want it slipping. And I'm going to pull it out and it should match to the other side. And then I'm going to make this panel up exactly the same way as the front 2 panels, and each of the flap panels. I'm going to be sewing the front panel and the lining together. Match them up at the top. So I mark it out to the 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to sew all the way down to the bottom. If you want to, you could pin it. Put the pins at a right angle to the seam, like that. So when you come to the pin, you can just sew straight over it, like this. You can pull the pin out. You haven't damaged the fabric and you haven't damaged your pin or the machine. But otherwise, keep lining the fabric up, raw edge to raw edge, and sew to the bottom. Now I usually put the flimsier fabric underneath and the more sturdy fabric on top, so it doesn't always go that the lining's on top. Sew to the lower corner where you're going to turn. Hand turn it if you want to. I usually do because I get exactly where I want to go. Leave the needle down, pick the foot up and turn your fabric, and just make sure that if there's any difference, you just follow the difference all the way along. So on this application, the lining front is a little bit over, and that's okay. So long as the panel front is equal to your 1/2 inch, that's all that matters. A little adjustment so you can see, and then sew to the next corner. When you get to the next corner, just line it up like that. As I get to the second corner, sew to the corner, and then leaving my needle down, foot up and turn. And we have the opposite in this case. We have the lining is a little bit longer than the side, so I'm going to make sure that the lining overlaps that little bit all the way to the top of this panel. But I'm also making sure that the side runs at the 1/2 inch. What you'll see is this one's slightly longer on here and the underside is slightly longer on there, but I've allowed for that difference as I've sewn. Then sew to the top. You can reverse if you want to. Just a couple of stitches holds everything in place. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut my corners within 1/8 of an inch from the corner, so it's there if you can see the stitching on both of the bottom corners, and then turn the panel the right way just to make sure that everything's in there, and you can poke the corners out as best I can, and then with a bit of luck wriggle it and get the rest of it out. In this application, it doesn't have to be very good because I'm going to be putting trim over and it'll hide everything. Now for the second panel. Now when you come to where the seam is, make sure you've opened it. Make sure that the seam on the other side is also open and flat, and then sew over both of them like this. Sometimes this one will catch on the foot plate here, so always double check that that is completely open. This is the width of the panel flap. I've actually cut it to 9 inches wide. The reason is you have 4 inches of fabric to tuck behind the faux pleats. Put your foot down, forward and back like you usually start. And again, just sew all the way to the end, keeping the fabrics as flat as possible. Upholstery has a 1/2 inch seam, as you can see, and quilting's a 1/4 inch, and dressmaking has 5/8 of an inch. Or if you're in the UK or use metric, a centimetre is perfectly good. Just like with your front panel, leave the needle down, lift and turn, and then sew across the bottom and then up to the top. I'm going to use the quilter's bump. It will hold for what I want it to do. And then I'm going to lay this over the top. This is for the top of the table. I'm going to pin it in place. I don't often pin things, but I just don't want it walking. I also want it to be a similar size. So if I pin it, it should be exactly that. Smooth it out. Put the pins at right angles so that you can sew over them if necessary, if you forget to take them out. Continue all the way around. I'm not going to trim it exact because I'll be trimming back anyway when I sew it into place. Now for the construction. I have the bump and the top pinned together. Pop it under here, extend the stitch to a number 5, and I'm just going to guide this through. Don't pull because I don't want any of it stretching, and I'm just going to run the side of the top fabric along the side of the foot, so it just gives me 1/4 of an inch sewing distance. It shouldn't walk. I usually do the longest length first. As you get to the bottom of the tabletop, go to the corner like you do all other things, needle down, lift the foot and turn so you can continue along the side length. And you need to go around all 4 sides like this. Just try to make sure this goes in square. I usually pull it here, make it flat, pinch my fingers down and let it run through. And repeat the same at the second corner. Do it all the way around. It holds everything in place for when you add the skirt to it. Another tip is when you're doing the second long side, hold the fabric out and just flatten it as you go. And you'll find that you don't pull anything as you go along if it's like this. I'm going to be putting the trim on. I haven't ironed this, so what I do is I pull the top fabric back and I finger press the hem up, and then I roll it out with my fingers so it's as flat as possible. I have a fringe to put on. I always cut between the loops, so where the loop goes up, and I'm going to start sewing about 1/4 to 1/2 inch in from the outside edge. And the stitches here I run along the base of the skirt, so it hangs down maybe 1/4 inch. I'm going to drop my needle down first, like that, and then I'm going to push the trim up against the needle, because if you drop the foot down first and then start, it spreads this out, and I don't want it. I want it to be tight in. And I'm just going to sew forward, and as I go along, I'm going to reposition these stitches here along the base of the skirt. This is a little bit of a pain to do because you're having to do little sections, but it works. Make sure everything's where it needs to be. Don't pull your trim, otherwise it'll bunch everything else up. When you get to the end, select where you're going to trim it off, which is between those loops as I showed you, and then snip down like that, pull it apart, and then snip between the stitches at the bottom. You don't want to undo all the stitches because that's what holds it all together, and I usually don't pull those out until I get to the customer's house. Push the last loop back as you sew. Make sure that the stitches here are in line with the base, and then hold it very carefully and then reverse over it. One thing I didn't tell you is when you look at this, there's plain stitches at the top, and there, the wrong side, it's chain stitch. Try to always remember to put the pretty stitch on top, and usually this gets sandwiched between 2 pieces of fabric, but this lady has a young dog and a child, and it's going in the hall, so it's a high traffic area, and she might at some time need to have it removed, so it's easier to remove. She's also having this trim put on, and again on the reverse there's a little chain stitch holding it together, and a nice finished stitch is on the front, and I'm going to just roll that over about that much, place that on top, and there's a little row of stitches up, and I'm going to put that on the stitches that I have just been sewing on. Just recheck, put the row of stitches where I've just been stitching, and move forward all the way along to the other end. Now again, when you're sewing it, don't pull, you just want it to go in as it needs to be sewn, because we don't want the front of the panel looking puckered. As you come to the finished end, trim it back and only put a small little fold on there. That's all it needs. It's just to hold everything in place. Cut that across like that, and as I get there, fold it under so it's nice and neat, and then stop almost on the edge of it. Needle down, foot up, turn, pinch that in. Don't worry about this showing. That's going to be well and truly underneath the flap, and go up, reverse like that, so it's all held into place and not going anywhere. On the other end, where you had originally folded it over, tuck it back under, and then stitch that fold in place to the top, needle down, foot up, and twist it. And again, don't pull it, just let everything go where it needs to go. I'm going to follow the second line like I had here, and it will keep it nice and even all the way to the end. I'm just going to finish this off. Then repeat this on 2 side panels and 2 front panels, and the flaps that go in between. This is one of the flap panels that goes underneath. All I need to do is quickly press it, then you fold it in half and you clip where the center is, like that. The other thing you've got to remember is, although the skirt is 32 inches, this has to be 1/4 inch shorter, and I'm going to measure from the end of the trim to 31 3/4 inches, and I'm going to do 2 points so it doesn't swivel or twist again 31 3/4. There's my pin marks, and then I'm going to just fold this over like that, and I'm going to press that fold in. Just makes life a little bit easier. Pop the pins back in to hold those folds for now. Trim off any extra threads that don't need to be there. Better to do it in the process, not leave everything to the end. Now, one way to get a really sharp corner, if you want to, is you open up the fabric with both of the seams going the same way. Press it like that. Try not to press the front and try not to press a fold in the back if you can help it. Then you close that up and just press it firm. It's the quickest way, and there you are. It's a little bit closer. I'm not going to worry too much. All of this is going to be hidden behind each other. Press all the way along. I only need to be a quick press because I just want everything to be where it needs to be. And again, you can feel the way the fabric goes, so you just pop it over. Try to get as far down as you can, like that. Any threads that pull through, just cut those off as well. That sometimes happens. Roll that forward. My son is doing some work for me in the garden, so it'll be a bit noisy. Pull that over like that, and it's done. Now, here again, fold the fabric in two and do a little clip to mark the center of the panel. Very, very important. With the outside panels, I'm going to measure up 32 inches just from the base of the trim to the top. And then the second one, I'll probably put 4 in. This is only a side panel, so it's not so wide. Turn it over, iron these across too. Pin mark to pin mark. It should go in relatively straight. And also, don't forget, which I've just done, to mark the center. Fold that, and there's my center mark. And because I did it this way, I'm just going to put a little nick like that. So that's the 4 sides. And now I'm going to do the back panel the same. I am going to mark the center of the back. It's very close to the join, so actually I don't need to mark it. But if this had been moved somewhere, which sometimes it does, I would have marked it. So that's my back. Now the top, you're going to have to mark each center side, and all this will come crystal clear when I've finished. I can trim this back now as it's all sewn in. I don't like to do it before just in case the fabric walks. Here's my second side. Make sure that's there on the long side and mark the center. This will be the back of the top, and then trim this side back a little bit because that's a little bit over the top. Now the front side has to be a little bit more informative to you. So on the front edge, I'm going to mark the center, and then because it's got 2 panels, I'm going to mark the center. We have a front panel. I'm going to place the marks together for the center panel. So there's that one. I'll put it sideways for now because I'll be altering it anyway. And then I move from the center to the side, open that up too and mark that. Then on the corner, I'm going to be sewing 1/2 inch in from the outside edge. So when I put this one in, I'm going to open that up and I'm going to run it into the corner here. This fold here is going to go slightly up from the original crease, only slightly, and that will lift the way the panel hangs. Pin that in there. I'm not going to iron the pleats in until right at the end because I've learnt when I'm sewing things it sometimes walks, especially when it's a number of fabrics together. Again, here's the center of the panel, and I'm going to just hold that there, roll it out and pin into place. This is the center of the front, and here again I'm just going to unfold the panel here and fold it back so it's in line with that center mark, lifting the ironed part slightly above the original iron part, and I'm going to pin that into place. So the second panel is there to there, pin it into place, pull that out, pin it into place, and then working into the center, you're going to make sure that your folds butt up to each other. Open that up a little bit and then pin that into place. Now the reason I am actually pinning on the iron line is that's where I want to be sewing. Here again, I'm going to go up to the back here, open that up, put my pin mark in, and then I'm going to pull that back, pop that in there. I'm actually going to measure in from the end to make sure that I've got just over 1/2 inch. It's always a wise thing to do. And then once I've measured in, and then I'm going to pull this out to where it needs to be. I'm going to have to adjust this as I'm sewing all the way along, which is a bit of a pain in the butt and time consuming. My bottom piece is going to be running, oh dear, that's not quite right. See, even I make mistakes. There we go. Let's pull that out. It's only a stitch or 2 in, so it's not major. There's my 1/2 inch from there. Pull that back out. double check from the outside edge to where you're going to start sewing. It doesn't have to be exactly 1/2 inch because there's quite a lot going on here. Let's start again. There's that. Just a couple of stitches to hold it. I'm going to take the next one out. I usually try to fold the fabric in to where I need to be going, and then pull this a little ways above where I need to be sewing. You can sew the panel in and then fold this over the top if you want. And then I'm going to recheck, reposition and sew. Put a little bit of pressure on, but not too much. So I'm going to recheck the side there, walked a little bit but not much, and sew. And do that all the way across. I'm not going to sew the pleat in. I'm going to sew up to my center mark. And the reason is the pleat might warp and I don't want to have to undo it. So I'm going to just pop that in. This gets a bit heavy and rather irritating after a while because you're dealing with so much, but I'd much rather get the front in since it's already warped a little bit. I'm going to stop just shy. Now I'm going to sew the pleat in, lift it a little way above my sew line, and now we're going to sew all the way across. Straighten out the next panel, which is on the front too. Line the fold mark together, go straight across. Stop once you get onto the new panel. Remove the pin, check the side of here against your measurements, pull your folded mark in, and then sew across again. And repeat to the end. I'm coming to the back end of the second panel and I'm going to unpin it and open it up just like I did coming to the center. I'm going to just double check a generous 1/2 inch for me to stop, and I'm actually going to pin this because it's easy to go over it. So I've pinned my 1/2 inch mark. I'm going to carry on sewing along my ironed line. I'm going to alter that so it's about 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to sew to the end. I can feel the pin under my fingers, so I don't want to go over the pin. I want to just stop before the pin, like this. Cut it back, pull the fabric back for the pleat, all the way back, finishing almost up to the pin. And the reason is that the top fabric might walk into where the pin actually is. If it's a little bit off, it won't matter. And then reverse. Now I'm going to place the side panel in. If you trim this up, it's easier to follow the markings on your sewing machine. Line up the center marks and pin into place. Move forward to the corner and pin into place. And here you just need to fold this down. And the reason you don't go all the way into the corner is that we've got a panel to go over and hide all of that. But I will fold that back along here so I can sew that fold in. This is when it gets a little bit chunky. Be a little bit wary of how much is going into the corners. This is when everything gets a little bit more complicated. You're going to have to pull the corner as straight as you can and then just slightly over so you can get your next row of stitching in, and start at your 1/2 inch, which should be just a little bit past where you stopped your panel going over. Line that up to the 1/2 inch mark and then sew forward. On the center back, sew to the center mark on the tabletop, which is here, and stop just a little bit shy, not too shy because otherwise you've got a lot to make up. I'm going to find the center mark of the back panel, which is here, and I'm going to just fold that in half, and this is going to be the pleat at the back to give weight to the whole tabletop. And then I'm going to pull that back and start sewing again, and this gets really heavy and really awkward, so let me carry on sewing a little bit further. There we go, 1/2 inch from the outside edge. When I get towards the other end, I will do it the same way as I had before, which is just to sew up to the corner, or just shy of the corner. Put the pleat in, and put the side panel back because that just is pulling everything out of kilter, and then put the back panel over the top, pull it back to the corner, just shy of the corner, and then sew that panel down to the end. Now going back to the center pleat, pull your fabric back halfway, and where that mark is, you push that down to where the join is, where the pleats are. Fold it open on one side. Now the second side, I'm going to push back into it because that has walked a bit. And before you sew it down, just pull the skirt end of the pleat to make sure that everything's in line and tight. Lift it up a little bit. Not this is going to ever show. Start sewing to where the center of that pleat is. And when you get to there, you push this bottom piece so it touches the other fold of that pleat, so it's nice and snug, and then sew straight over the top, and then making sure everything's flat, so to the end of this folded pleat, it should all be in place. Trim all the fabric back to that 1/2 inch if it's overlapped anyway. I am going to sew into this corner where I've clipped it. Trying to keep everything else as smooth as I can. I'm going to fold those fabrics over so they're flat. Here's my corner. Hand twist it if you need to. Needle down, foot up, twist the fabrics, pull the fabric round on that pivot point where the needle is, and pull the fabrics tight along the sew line. Drop the foot and sew to the end. Keep everything as smooth as you can as you go. And then trim everything back to that 1/2 inch. That's really important for the next part of the project. The last part is the most awkward. You're going to have to cut all of these corners right back as close as you can because they're going to get very, very bulky otherwise, like that. Nice and close. So this is the lining for the top. Best way to do it is just mark your center marks, because then you can line those up with the tabletop, and hopefully everything will sew into the right places. Put right sides together, which is a little bit funky to see here. There's the center mark there. Line them up, pin it in place, and go at right angles. Then work your way across the tabletop. All the skirt is going to be hidden inside. That's about 1/2 inch in, 1/2 inch in. When I get there, I'll wriggle it into place. Now I've got to come around the corner. I'm going to put another one in there just to hold it. Here's my side panel. So what I'm going to do is fold the pieces in like that so it keeps it nice and neat, and I'm just going to fold it up 2 or 3 times. Pop it underneath. Here's the front panel. I'm going to do the same with that too. Just fold it up 2 or 3 times so it's nice and flat. And here's my corner panel, which I'm just going to have to fold that way. So I'm going to bring this piece down over the top. This gets really quite awkward as I go around it. Match my center to the center here. Put the pin in at right angles. Make sure everything is tucked in from the center to the outside edge, like this. Try to get that as flat as you can. And it's awkward, but there's that piece. Now I've got the back here, which I will also fold in as best I can. This is the inside lining. Pop that into here. Pop the corner in like that. You see all of this is going into here. I'm going to pin it on there. I'm going to pin it here just to hold everything where I want it. So that's that. Then I'm going to start pinning along here. Put that mark on the center of the back, which is here where that pleat is, and then pin from the center to the outside edge. Soon all your tablecloth will be in one bag, and then just pull, make sure it all fits in. This is one of the times I do pin. I said in previous films I often don't bother pinning, but this is one of the ones I am really quite fanatical about pinning. Actually, I don't like to have to do this time and time again. Here's one side of this all into there, and then fold up the other. I have all 4 sides pinned, a big mound of fabric inside. Just make sure it's secure. Sometimes some of these pop out. It's imperative that they're all secure. Now I'm going to start sewing, if I can, along the center back, and I'm going to find the pleat. Where's the pleat? Here's the pleat to here. So I'm going to start sewing midway between the pleat and the center of the back panel, which is going to be a bit awkward, and I keep getting stuck with pins, so I'm not very happy there. And I'm going to pop it under, and I'm going to be sewing it a 1/2 inch, so a 1/2 inch seam. I'm going to go forward and back to start it, and then I'm going to ease all of this through. Put your fingers down and make sure there's no lumps and bumps. If there's a lump and a bump anywhere within sort of 2 inches of your needle going forward, might mean that the fabric underneath has pleated and you'll end up with a skirt that doesn't fall straight. I'm with this one, just take your time. Don't hurry. Just ease it through. Because there's a huge amount of fabric in this corner. Just wriggle it and make sure it's all going through straight. If you need to, just run your finger in between to make sure there's nothing there that shouldn't be there. As you get to the corner, just pull your pin so you can adjust or move anything, because this is up. I want that as flat as I can get it. And I'm going to sew all that out to its 1/2 inch. Always take a last minute peek, because if anything's moved, you will sew over it and then nothing lays flat. Sew to the corner, needle down, lift your foot, swivel this around so you can get to the next side, which is a little bit of a pain because there's so much going on. Lift up the fabric, push that pleat the other way so you don't go over it. Put the foot down and start sewing forward, still with your 1/2 inch seam allowance, and continue all the way around. Just make sure your centre lines always match up, because sometimes the fabric walks and you don't want it walking too much. I've just come down the 4th side, which is back down the back of the tablecloth, and I am going to do a forward and reverse just shy of the centre back. So what's left open is quite a big part. I'm going to take out the centre pins like that, and I'll pop them there. I'm going to pull the skirt out through the back like this. Just takes a little minute to get it all through. And try not to split your seams. This is when I hope I haven't sewn it to the wrong part, which I have done when I was first starting out. And actually you need to cut back the corners before they all come through, otherwise they do get a bit bulky. Let's do this one as well. When you've pulled it all the way through, you should have like a little area there that needs to be sewn closed. So you can either do that by hand or on the sewing machine. Make sure your centre lines up with the centre so it doesn't walk. There and there. Just pull it tight. I'm going to hand sew this shut because it's always neater. I'm going to come back underneath here so that the knot will be hidden like that. And I'm going to sew just a few stitches forward like that, and then across from where I came up, just a few stitches into the fold. If I pull it open, it looks like a ladder. I always call it ladder stitch and other people call it slip stitch, but that's the stitch I use. Basically I'm going into the lining, I'm not going through very far, because that's all I'm interested in holding on to is the lining. I tuck all the threads back in if I can, and it looks nice and tidy. Just remember which side you started on, otherwise you end up with a big gap. I told you originally don't press the pleats in because they can vary. So this is when I start pressing pleats in, and that one's a 4-inch pleat at the top. So I'm going to just put 4 inches there, and then 4 inches at the bottom. Now you might want to put a little stitch in here to hold everything. I don't have time today. In a week or so I'll go back to my friend's house and stitch them. So that's one side, and then I'll do the same on the other. All these pleats are going to be a different size. They just vary a little bit. So this one is just over 4 inches. Pull that over to the same distance, and then at the bottom just 3 separate parts, and then you don't have wobbly lines. Don't press it with the pleat underneath because you will end up steaming everything that you don't want to be steaming. So you just lightly press, and with a bit of luck she's got a steamer, otherwise we're going to have to do this better at a later date. I'm going to pin those in place just for travelling so they don't unfold, and only at the bottom where the pins won't mark the front face, and just work your way around all sides. The corner ones straighten out as best you can like that, and iron in the corner, because then it will hold when it's in place and give a sharper look. Just make sure it's even all the way down so you don't get tram lines, because that won't look so good. So there we go, that's the corner. Slowly work your way around the table. Once they're ironed, try to keep them as flat as you can. Now that's the difficult part, because even with an ironing board, that's not easy. The best size table is a 8 foot by 4 foot, but I don't have room for one of those. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've gained some insight on how to make a table skirt. I hope I've covered some pointers that would be of use to you. Take care. See you later. Ciao.